It all started with a little bit of mold. Or, to be more precise, it started with a $150 fine for trying to get rid of said mold. Welcome to suburban warfare, where the weapons of choice aren't guns and bombs, but HOA bylaws and weaponized silence. Before I bought my first house, I thought the American dream was about a patch of grass to call your own and a garage to fill with junk you'll never use. I was wrong. The real American dream, it turns out, is a blood sport of petty grievances, and my next-door neighbor, Brenda Henderson, was an Olympic gold medalist. My house wasn't a palace. It was a modest two-story colonial in Maple Creek Estates, a neighborhood that prided itself on having the most uniformly beige houses and aggressively cheerful welcome signs in the state. I'd sunk every penny I had into the down payment, a fact that filled me with equal parts pride and terror. I'm a graphic designer, which is a fancy way of saying I sit in my sweatpants all day moving pixels around for clients who use phrases like, "make it pop." Working from home meant I was intimately familiar with my house's every flaw, and its most glaring flaw was the north-facing wall. For the better part of a decade, this side of the house had been locked in a losing battle with nature. A greenish-black film of grime, mold, and general atmospheric despair coated the vinyl siding, making it look like the house had a 5 o'clock shadow it could never quite shave. It had character, I told myself. It was rustic, but after my mother visited and asked if I was cultivating a penicillin farm for a science fair, I knew my days of procrastination were numbered. This was it. This was the weekend I would finally become a real homeowner. Not just a guy who paid a mortgage, but a guy who did stuff. Productive, manly stuff. I had visions of myself in a pristine pair of work gloves, nodding approvingly at my handiwork while a bald eagle shed a single, patriotic tear overhead. My primary obstacle, besides my own laziness, was Brenda Henderson. Brenda lived next door in a house so immaculate it looked like it was rendered in a computer program. Her lawn was a perfect, crew-cut carpet of emerald green. Her flowers were arranged by color. I'm pretty sure she measured the distance between her tulips with a laser level. She was the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, a woman whose hobbies included peering through her blinds, documenting minor infractions in a little black notebook, and maintaining the structural integrity of the neighborhood's passive aggression. We'd had only a few interactions, mostly consisting of her handing me a note about my recycling bin being 2 inches too close to the curb, but I already knew she was the final boss of my quiet, suburban life. Still, how much trouble could a man get into for just cleaning his own house? The naivety, in retrospect, is staggering. Saturday morning dawned bright and beautiful, a perfect day for war. I drove to the local tool rental place and came back with the biggest, loudest, most obnoxiously orange gas-powered pressure washer they had. It was a magnificent beast, a 3,000 psi engine of pure, grime-obliterating justice. I filled it with gas, hooked up the water, and pulled the starter cord. The engine didn't just start, it exploded into a guttural, ground-shaking roar. It sounded like a Harley-Davidson gargling gravel. Birds scattered from the trees. I'm pretty sure the seismic shock registered in a neighboring state. A grin spread across my face. This was the sound of progress. I aimed the nozzle at the wall and pulled the trigger. A high-pressure jet of water slammed into the siding, and the result was nothing short of miraculous. A clean, beige stripe appeared in the sea of green. It was like watching one of those cleaning videos on the internet, but in glorious, high-decibel reality. I was an artist, and my canvas was a decade of filth. I carved clean lines through the muck, spelling out my initials before blasting them away. I was in the zone, a maestro conducting a symphony of internal combustion and hydro-powered fury. I was about halfway through the wall when a shadow fell over me. I turned, and there she was, Brenda Henderson, marching across her pristine lawn with the grim determination of a general surveying a battlefield. She wore a pastel pink tracksuit and a visor, and her face was pinched into a mask of pure indignation. I let go of the trigger, and the engine settled into a rumbling idle. "Excuse me!" she shouted over the noise. "Excuse me!" I sighed and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the chirping of the now-returned birds. "Hey, Brenda," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Making some progress, right? You should see the before and after. It's like night and day." "Progress?" Her voice was tight, thin. "Leo, it is 9:15 in the morning, on a Saturday. My husband, Gary, is attempting his morning meditation, and you have filled our sacred space with the sound of a monster truck rally. It's a pressure washer, Brenda. They're not exactly known for being quiet. I'm just trying to clean up the place a bit." She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hiss. "I'm aware of what it is, and I am also aware of the Maple Creek Decency and Decibel Covenant, Section 4, Article B. No disruptive mechanical noises exceeding 70 decibels shall be permitted before the hour of 10 a.m. on weekends and holidays. You, my friend, are in clear violation." I blinked. "The what covenant?" "Brenda, I've never even heard of that. I'm just cleaning my house. It'll be done in an hour or two." "An hour or two of this auditory assault?" She gestured at the silent machine as if it were a dormant volcano. "My Persian cat, Mr. Fluffington, was so startled he fell off his fainting couch." "A fainting couch, Leo. He is emotionally distraught." I had to physically restrain myself from asking if Mr. Fluffington also had a case of the vapors and a collection of smelling salts. "I'm really sorry about your cat, but I rented this thing for the day. I have to get it done." Her eyes narrowed. "Then I will have no choice but to file a formal complaint with the Homeowners Association. I will be documenting this, with video evidence." She held up her phone. A wave of pure, unadulterated annoyance washed over me. I'd tried to be reasonable. I'd tried to be the good neighbor. But there's a limit. "You do that, Brenda," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. I pulled the starter cord. The engine roared back to life, a defiant middle finger of mechanical noise. I turned my back to her and went back to blasting the wall, the clean stripes of victory feeling sweeter than ever. The victory was short-lived. 2 days later, nestled amongst the junk mail and a bill I was planning to ignore for another week, was a crisp, cream-colored envelope. It bore the official crest of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association, a smiling maple leaf that suddenly looked smug and judgmental. My stomach sank. I tore it open. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind of paper used for wedding invitations or declarations of war. The text was printed in a stern serif font. R.I. Official Notice of Covenant Violation. Dear Mr. Maxwell, it has come to the attention of the Maple Creek Architectural and Community Harmony Committee that on Saturday, September 13th, a violation occurred at your property. Specifically, a breach of the Decency and Decibel Covenant, Section 4, Article B, violation, excessive auditory disruption during peak quiet hours, 9:15 a.m. Following a formal, time-stamped, and video-documented complaint from a fellow community member, the committee has found you in violation. As per the community guidelines, a fine of $150 is hereby assessed. There it was, in black and white. $150 for cleaning my own house, $150 because Mr. Fluffington had his delicate feline sensibilities ruffled. I read the letter 3 times, my blood pressure climbing with each pass. This wasn't about the money. It was about the principle, the sheer, unmitigated audacity. I walked to my window and looked out at Brenda's house. It sat there, silent and perfect, mocking me. I could almost see her silhouette in the window, watching, waiting. She hadn't just complained. She had won the first battle. She thought she could fine me into submission. She thought I would just quietly pay up and learn my place in her beige, silent little kingdom. A slow, dangerous grin spread across my face. She wanted quiet. She had weaponized the concept of quiet against me. Fine. I would give her quiet. I would become a connoisseur of quiet. A silent artist of home improvement. I would devise a solution so meticulously, so infuriatingly, so unimpeachably quiet that it would drive her absolutely, certifiably insane. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. My vengeance quest began not with a bang, but with a Google search. For the next 24 hours, my apartment was a command center. My laptop screen was a mosaic of open tabs. I dove headfirst into the weird, wonderful world of low-decibel living and HOA loopholes. My search history became a testament to a mind on the edge. How to clean vinyl siding without noise. Whisper quiet construction tools. Weaponized silence petty revenge. Is it legal to wash a house with a giant sponge on a stick? World's quietest leaf blower. Spoiler, it doesn't exist. HOA legal precedents, auditory disputes. I learned about sound dampening materials, brushless motors, and the legal definition of ambient noise. I briefly considered hiring a team of Amish craftsmen to clean the siding with old-fashioned rags and buckets of soapy water, but the logistics seemed complicated. I needed something that was both silent and visibly, absurdly laborious. The solution had to be the punishment, and then, in the deepest recesses of a professional contractor forum, I found it. A thread from 6 years ago where someone jokingly asked how to remove a stain from vinyl siding. One reply, clearly sarcastic, said, "Just sand it off, I guess." My eyes widened. Sanding. Of course, it was perfect. It was inefficient. It was ridiculous. It was a terrible way to clean vinyl siding, but, and this was the crucial part, it could be done with modern battery-powered brushless electric orbital sanders, tools that hummed and whirred with all the menace of a contented kitten. This was it. This was my weapon. Now I just needed an army. I knew I couldn't do this myself. The sheer absurdity of the task required a team of professionals to grant it an air of legitimacy. I spent the morning calling various exterior cleaning and contracting companies. The first 3 calls ended with the person on the other end laughing so hard they had to hang up. "You want to what?" one guy wheezed, gasping for air. "You want to pay my crew hourly to sand your siding? Is this a prank call?" I was starting to lose hope. Then I found a Google listing with no reviews and a strangely generic name. Sal's Specialized Solutions. It had a picture of a burly, bearded man smiling next to a suspiciously clean work van. I dialed the number, expecting another rejection. A deep, calm voice answered. "Sal's." I took a breath and launched into my now rehearsed pitch. "Hi, my name is Leo. I have a unique home exterior project. I need to have the vinyl siding cleaned on my 2-story house." "Power washer," the voice, presumably Sal's, grunted. "Standard job. Takes half a day. We can be in and out tomorrow." "Right, well here's the thing. I can't use a power washer. It's a noise issue. I was thinking of an alternative method." I braced myself. "I was thinking of sanding it." There was a long, profound silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. I was about to apologize and hang up when the voice came back, low and intrigued. "Is this a neighbor job?" The question hung in the air, loaded with unspoken meaning. It was like a secret handshake. "It is the neighbor-est job you have ever seen in your entire life," I confessed. A low chuckle rumbled through the phone. "I like it. Meet me for coffee in an hour. The Daily Grind on Main Street. My treat." An hour later, I was sitting across from Sal himself. He was even more impressive in person. A mountain of a man in a flannel shirt, with a beard that looked like it had its own ecosystem and hands that could palm a basketball. He looked like he could fell a redwood with a sharp glance, but his eyes twinkled with a mischievous intelligence. He listened intently as I laid out the entire saga. The mold, the power washer, Brenda, Mr. Fluffington's fainting couch, the $150 fine. He didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly, stroking his beard like a wise old wizard. When I finished, he leaned forward, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "I love it," he said, his voice a happy rumble. "We have a name for these. We call them spite jobs. They're my favorite. They require more than just labor. They require artistry, finesse." "So you'll do it?" I asked, a surge of hope rising in my chest. "Do it? Leo, we are going to turn this into a masterpiece of malicious compliance." He started sketching on a napkin, his big hands surprisingly deft. "Here's the plan. I've got a crew of 4, the best. We use top-of-the-line German sanders, brushless, battery-powered. The only sound you'll hear is a gentle whir. We'll power them off a silent lithium battery bank in my truck. No generator, no noise. We'll set up our scaffolding using rubber-dampened clamps to minimize sound. My guys communicate with hand signals on jobs like this. It will be the quietest, most inefficient, most infuriatingly professional home renovation your neighbor has ever witnessed." "How much is this masterpiece going to cost?" I asked, dreading the answer. Sal looked at his napkin, did some quick math in his head, and named a price. It was obscene. It was nearly 10 times the cost of a power wash. It was worth every single penny. "Sal," I said, shaking his giant hand, "you're a poet." "No," he grinned. "I'm a specialized solution." The following Monday morning, at precisely 8:59 a.m., Operation Sound of Silence commenced. Sal's van, a clean, unassuming white vehicle, pulled up to my curb. 4 men emerged, dressed in matching navy blue overalls. They didn't shout or slam doors. They moved with the quiet, coordinated grace of a SWAT team. Sal gave me a solemn nod from the driver's seat. I sat on my porch with a large mug of coffee, a book open in my lap that I had no intention of reading. This was theater, and I had a front row seat. The crew began unloading the scaffolding from the van. As promised, there were no clangs or bangs. Metal pieces met with a dull, rubbery thud. They assembled the entire structure against my north wall in under 20 minutes, communicating with a series of precise, almost beautiful hand signals. It was like watching a bizarre construction-themed ballet. Then came the sanders. Each crew member clipped a battery pack to their belt and ascended the scaffolding, sander in hand. Sal gave a final signal, a slow, deliberate thumbs up. And then, the work began. 4 sanders switched on simultaneously. The sound was nothing. Well, not nothing, but close. It was a gentle, hypnotic, multi-layered whirr. It was the sound of 4 high-end electric toothbrushes, the sound of a server farm in the distance. It was objectively, undeniably, and gloriously quiet. The crew began to move across the wall in a synchronized pattern, their sanders gliding over the vinyl, gently buffing away the grime. It took less than 5 minutes for Brenda's curtain to twitch. A minute later, her front door opened. She stepped out onto her porch, a bewildered expression on her face. She scanned the street, clearly searching for the source of the source of whatever she thought was happening. Her eyes landed on my house, on the 4 men silently working, on me sipping my coffee. Her brow furrowed in confusion. This wasn't in the script. There was no noise, no disruption. Just 4 men engaged in the most placid and bizarre home maintenance project imaginable. She marched to the edge of her lawn. What are you doing?" she called out, her voice betraying her utter bafflement. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "Morning, Brenda," I said, my voice cheerful. "Just finishing up that siding job. You were right, by the way. The power washer was a bit much. Found a much quieter method. Hope this isn't a bother." I gave her a dazzling smile. "You're welcome." The cogs were turning in her head. I could practically see them grinding. You're sanding the siding?" she stammered. "Yep," I said brightly. "Orbital sanders with 220 grit pads. Very gentle. And best of all, fully compliant with Section 4, Article B of the Decency and Decibel Covenant. Can't be too careful, you know." She stared, speechless. She was looking for an angle, a violation, but there was none. It was just weird. Defeated for the moment, she retreated back into her house. The silence, it seemed, was deafening. An hour later, a police car cruised down our street and pulled up in front of my house. Of course. Unable to find a noise violation, she had escalated to calling the authorities. 2 officers, one tall and thin, with the air of a man who had seen everything, Officer Miller, and one younger and stockier who looked like he was still trying to make sense of it all, Officer Davis, got out of the car. Miller approached me on the porch. "Good morning, sir. We received a call about, He glanced at his notepad. "Some suspicious and intimidating activity at this residence." "Intimidating?" I asked, feigning surprise. "My goodness, is everyone okay?" "The caller seemed to think your workers were behaving in a threatening manner," Davis added, eyeing the crew on the scaffolding, who continued their silent, rhythmic sanding, oblivious. "Threatening, officer? They're the most considerate crew I've ever hired. Haven't made a peep all morning." Brenda chose that moment to reappear on her porch. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. Look at them, just look. It's unnatural, 4 strange men sanding the house, not making a sound. It's unnerving. They're plotting something." Miller turned his head to look at Brenda, then back to my crew, then to me. A look of profound, soul-deep weariness settled over his features. "So, let me get this straight, ma'am," he said, his voice as flat as a Kansas landscape. "You called 911 because these men are quietly cleaning?" "It's not just cleaning, it's aggressively silent," she insisted. Miller turned back to me. "Sir, is there any particular reason your men are, sanding the vinyl siding of your house?" This was my moment. "Just trying to be a good, considerate neighbor, officer," I said with the utmost sincerity. "We received a rather significant noise complaint last week about a power washer. So we pivoted to a more community-friendly solution. We are in full compliance with all local ordinances, and more importantly, all HOA bylaws regarding noise. My contractor, Sal, has our permit right here." On cue, Sal, who had been observing from his van, emerged. He handed Officer Miller a clipboard. On it, protected by a plastic sleeve, was a perfectly filled-out exterior surface refinishing permit from the city. It was a thing of beauty, laminated even. Miller and Davis looked at the permit, then at each other. They shared a silent communication that I interpreted as, "This is why we can't have nice things." Miller handed the clipboard back to Sal. He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, they have a permit. They aren't breaking any laws. They aren't even breaking your HOA's laws, which, frankly, is a minor miracle. There's nothing we can do here." "But," she started. "Have a good day, ma'am," Miller said, cutting her off. He tipped his hat to me. "Try and keep the, quiet down, sir." He and Davis got back in their car and drove away, shaking their heads. I took another long, slow sip of my coffee. Round 2 was mine. I had won the battle of noise, but I had severely underestimated my opponent's capacity for finding new and creative fronts on which to wage war. If she couldn't attack me with sound, she would attack me with light. 2 days after the police visit, a white van from Henderson and Sons Security Solutions, a company I later learned was owned by her brother-in-law, spent the afternoon at Brenda's house. By nightfall, my life had become a perpetual state of surprise daylight. Brenda had installed 3 industrial-grade motion-activated floodlights on the side of her house. They were the kind of lights used at maximum security prisons or to illuminate NFL stadiums. And they were all aimed, with military precision, directly at my second-floor bedroom and office windows. That night I learned just how much motion happens in a suburban neighborhood after dark. A cat slinking across the lawn, a plastic bag blowing in the wind, a moth fluttering too close to the sensor. Each event triggered a blinding, instantaneous flash of artificial sun that bleached my retinas and filled my bedroom with the light of 1,000 exploding stars. Sleep was impossible. I tried blackout curtains, but the light was so intense it seeped through the edges, creating an apocalyptic glow. My internal monologue, usually a stream of sarcastic but relatively stable commentary, began to unravel. I started having conversations with my toaster. I found myself staring at walls. I was a sleep-deprived zombie, fueled by caffeine and pure, unadulterated spite. Accompanying the light show was a crisp note, slipped under my door. For enhanced neighborhood security, we must all be vigilant. Thwarted on the auditory and legal fronts, Brenda had decided to go nuclear. She called for an emergency meeting of the Maple Creek Estates HOA. The subject, according to the notice posted on the community message board, was an urgent proposed amendment to the bylaws, regulation of atypical or unconventional home maintenance practices. It was a thinly veiled attempt to outlaw sanding and anything else she deemed unnatural for good. I knew I couldn't go into this fight alone. I called Sal. "She installed floodlights," I said, my voice hoarse, "and she's trying to change the rules of the game." "The emergency amendment," Sal sighed, like an old general hearing of a predictable enemy tactic. "Classic move, desperate. Don't worry, kid. I've dealt with hundreds of these meetings. They're all the same. A bunch of scared homeowners who just don't want their property values to go down. You just have to speak their language. I'll coach you." The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled faintly of chlorine and shattered dreams. About 20 of my neighbors were there, a motley crew of suburban archetypes. There was Mr. Fitzwilliam, a conspiracy theorist who thought Wi-Fi was a government mind control tool. There was sweet, elderly Mrs. Gable, who brought a plate of cookies. There was Chad from down the street, who just wanted to make sure no new rules would affect his God-given right to operate his 6-burner gas grill. Brenda stood at a podium at the front of the room, armed with a laser pointer and a PowerPoint presentation she had clearly spent days preparing. "Friends, neighbors," she began, her voice filled with synthetic gravity. "I have called you here tonight because our community is facing a crisis of aesthetics." What followed was a dramatic 20-minute monologue on the potential dangers of unconventional maintenance. She showed blurry, zoomed-in photos of my house, pointing out micro-abrasions on the vinyl. She spoke of unknown long-term effects and aesthetic degradation. She painted a picture of a neighborhood overrun with people cleaning their houses with toothbrushes and polishing their driveways with silk cloths. It was a masterpiece of fear-mongering. When she finished, all eyes turned to me. Sal's words echoed in my head. "Don't be emotional, be logical, make it about them, not you." I stood up, holding a single piece of paper. "Thank you, Brenda, for that passionate presentation," I began, my voice calm and steady. "I understand your concerns. We all want to protect our property values. That's why we live here. But I think this proposed amendment, while well-intentioned, is a dangerous overreach. I let that hang in the air for a moment. My contractor and I continued, chose the sanding method for one reason: to be considerate, to be quiet. We were fined for being too loud, so we found the quietest possible solution. This amendment isn't about protecting the neighborhood from strange practices. It's about punishing a homeowner for complying with the existing rules. I saw a few heads nod. Chad looked intrigued. And let's think about the precedent this sets, I pressed on. What counts as atypical or unconventional? Who decides? If this passes, the committee could decide they don't like the brand of weed killer you use. They could fine you for using an electric mower instead of a gas one, or vice versa. They could dictate the specific type of sponge you use to wash your car. This amendment gives a small group of people the power to micromanage every aspect of how you care for your own home. That hit home. I could see the fear in their eyes, the fear of the HOA, the one thing that united all of us. As for the safety of the method, I said, holding up my paper, this is a signed and notarized affidavit from the siding manufacturer confirming that light, non-abrasive sanding is a perfectly viable, if inefficient, method for surface cleaning and will not void the warranty. Checkmate. Brenda's face went pale. The vote was called. The amendment was defeated, 18-2. Brenda and her silent husband, Gary, were the only ones who voted for it. I had won. I had stared into the bureaucratic abyss of the HOA and made it blink. As I walked out, Mrs. Gable pressed a cookie into my hand and whispered, "Good for you, dearie." The war was far from over, but I had just won a major battle. Sal was ecstatic when I told him about the HOA meeting. "The affidavit from the manufacturer! That was a masterstroke, kid! You're a natural!" He insisted I come down to his workshop the next day for a victory celebration, which consisted of lukewarm coffee and styrofoam cups. His workshop wasn't what I expected. It was a large, immaculately organized garage space on the industrial side of town. Tools were hung on pegboards in perfect, neat rows. There were no greasy calendars on the wall, no piles of scrap metal. It was the workspace of a man who took his specialized solutions very seriously. "I want you to meet some people," Sal said, leading me toward a back room where two other guys were sitting around a table, looking over some blueprints. "Leo, this is Marco, and this is Doug. Marco's our painter, and Doug here is a landscape artist." Marco was a quiet, wiry man with paint splatters on his glasses who nodded at me. Doug was a cheerful, sun-weathered guy who gave me a firm handshake. "Leo's the sanding job," Sal explained to them. They both grinned. "Ah, the Henderson job," Doug said. "Heard about that one. Classic Brenda. I had a run-in with her last year. She tried to file a complaint because my client's Japanese maple had leaves that were, and I quote, an aggressive shade of crimson. She wrote me up once," Marco added, his voice soft, "because the sheen on the exterior trim I was using wasn't a community-approved matte finish. I had to show her the HOA bylaws, which, of course, say nothing about paint sheen." It was a revelation. I wasn't alone. I was part of a silent fraternity of contractors and homeowners who had all been terrorized by Brenda Henderson. We were a support group, a band of brothers forged in the fires of petty tyranny. Sal called them his spite job network. They were the people he called when a job required more than just skill. It required a certain philosophical alignment. We spent the next hour swapping war stories. Doug told us about a client who, annoyed by a neighbor who complained about his barbecue smoke, had Doug install a massive HOA-approved but strategically placed weeping willow tree that would eventually block the neighbor's entire view of the sunset. Marco described painting a garage door the exact, technically permissible shade of beige as the house next to it, effectively making the neighbor's house look like an extension of his client's garage. It was inspiring. This was high art. "So, what's her next move?" Sal asked me. "She's moved on to psychological warfare," I said, and I explained the blinding, sleep-destroying floodlights. Doug whistled. "Light pollution, a nasty tactic, hard to fight. Security is a legitimate reason for lighting." "We can't fight it directly," Sal mused, stroking his beard, "so we have to make it irrelevant. We need a grand finale for your project, kid. Something that finishes the job, but also serves as the final definitive statement. It has to be big, it has to be silent, and it has to be 100%, unimpeachably, by the book legal." We brainstormed for an hour. Doug suggested a silent garden installation, involving dozens of workers planting a hedge with hand trowels. Sal floated the idea of washing the windows with a specialized silent squeegee team rappelling from the roof. Then Marco, who had been quietly sketching on a notepad, cleared his throat. "You're cleaning the wall," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you're thinking too small. You shouldn't just clean the wall, you should consecrate it." He turned his notepad around. It was a rough sketch of my house's north wall, but instead of beige siding, it was covered in a sprawling, vibrant, and utterly bonkers piece of art. "A mural," I breathed. "A mural," Marco confirmed. "Completely silent to install. I use electric, low-pressure sprayers. They barely hiss. We get a permit from the city for an exterior artistic installation. As long as we aren't using any colors explicitly forbidden by the HOA, and I've read the bylaws, there are none, there's nothing she can do. She wants to stare at your wall all day? Let's give her something to look at." Sal slammed his hand on the table, a huge grin spreading across his face. "Marco, you magnificent bastard. It's perfect." We looked at the sketch. It was a psychedelic landscape of swirling colors, smiling mountains, and blissed-out-looking woodland creatures. It was the most beautiful, most passive-aggressive thing I had ever seen. The theme? Marco had already written it at the bottom of the page. Ode to Auditory Serenity. Getting a permit for a 2-story psychedelic mural in Maple Creek Estates should have been impossible. But Sal was a master of bureaucratic warfare. He knew which forms to fill out, which offices to visit, and which specific magic words to use. We didn't call it a mural, we called it an exterior artistic embellishment. We included a detailed list of materials and a color palette that technically included every single approved HOA color, along with about 50 others. We framed it as a project to enhance the community's cultural tapestry. After 2 weeks of paperwork and a surprisingly brief review by a city council that was clearly too bored to care, a crisp official permit was issued. We had it framed. The following Saturday, at precisely 8:59 a.m., the entire Spite Job Network descended on my property. It was a sight to behold. Sal's van pulled up, followed by Doug's landscaping truck and Marco's paint-splattered van. It looked like we were about to build a small town. The silent ballet began again, but on a grander scale. Sal's crew erected the scaffolding with their rubber-dampened clamps. Doug's team began silently digging a new flower bed at the base of the wall. Using only hand trowels and communicating with nods and shrugs, they started planting the most bizarre, Dr. Seuss-looking succulents I had ever seen, all technically on the HOA's list of approved drought-resistant plants. Then Marco and his assistant ascended the scaffolding. They didn't have clattering cans of paint. They had sleek, quiet, battery-powered sprayers connected to backpacks. They wore headsets to communicate. The whole operation had the quiet, focused intensity of a bomb disposal squad. I took up my usual position on the porch with my coffee. The curtain in Brenda's window twitched, as expected. A moment later, she was on her porch, her arms crossed, ready for battle. But as she watched the silent, coordinated effort, her expression shifted from anger to utter confusion. What was this? The sanding was done. Why were they back? Then Marco began to paint. He started with a base coat of a serene sky blue. Then came the swirls of purple and orange for a setting sun. The sun, when he painted it, had a gentle, blissfully smiling face. Then came the mountains, which looked like they were gently swaying to some unheard music. By lunchtime, a family of squirrels wearing tiny, painted-on headphones had appeared, gathered around a giant, multicolored mushroom. Brenda watched in abject horror. This wasn't just a cleaning job anymore. This was a permanent installation. This was a 2-story Technicolor monument to her defeat being erected 10 yards from her living room window. Every time she looked outside, for the rest of her life in that house, she would see smiling squirrels in headphones. She stormed across the lawn. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, all pretense of calm completely gone. I stood up and walked to the edge of my porch, holding up a clear plastic sleeve. Inside was our beautiful, framed permit. "It's art, Brenda," I said cheerfully. "We're enhancing the community's cultural tapestry. It's called Ode to Auditory Serenity. Do you like it? Marco is very talented." "You can't do this," she sputtered, gesturing wildly at the wall. "This will destroy our property values. It's an eyesore. It's visual pollution." "I don't know, Brenda," I said, pretending to study the mural. "I think the smiling sun really ties the whole cul-de-sac together. And don't worry, it's fully permitted. City and HOA. We checked every bylaw. We're not in violation of a single rule." She just stood there on my lawn, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, utterly defeated. There was no rule for this, no covenant. She had built her kingdom on the foundation of rules, and now she was being crushed by them. She let out a frustrated scream and stormed back to her house. The quiet, gentle hissing of Marco's paint sprayer was the only sound. An hour later, the familiar sight of a police cruiser rolling down my street signaled the next phase of Brenda's meltdown. I almost felt sorry for Officers Miller and Davis as they trudged up my driveway. They looked older than they had just a week ago. The accumulated weight of Maple Creek's petty disputes was visibly aging them. "Don't tell me," Miller said, not even waiting for me to speak. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Let me guess. You're painting too quietly?" "It's a public nuisance," Brenda yelled from her porch, having called them from the safety of her house. "It's a deliberately offensive display. And those painters, they're communicating in a coded, threatening manner on their little headsets. They're planning something." Officer Davis sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the sorrow of the entire human condition. He turned to me, a flicker of something that might have been a smile playing on his lips. "Psychological warfare, sir? That's the official complaint this time." "It's art, officer," I said calmly, gesturing to the nearly completed masterpiece. "Titled Ode to Auditory Serenity, fully permitted by the city. We're just a group of citizens trying to beautify the neighborhood while remaining deeply respectful of the sensitive auditory needs of our neighbors." Sal, ever prepared, materialized with the laminated permit. Miller took the clipboard, glanced at it, and handed it back. He looked at the mural, then at Brenda, then at me. He looked like a weary parent who had been called in to mediate a fight over a broken toy. He walked to the edge of my lawn, positioning himself directly between our two houses. "All right, that's it. Everybody listen up," he said, his voice suddenly firm, professional. "Ma'am," he said to Brenda, "you have called 911 twice in 1 week for non-emergencies. These men are not breaking the law. If you call again for anything short of an actual fire or a medical emergency, I will cite you for misuse of emergency services. Do you understand me?" Brenda's face went white. She nodded silently. Then Miller turned to me. "And you?" he said, his expression softening slightly. "You've made your point, brilliantly, I might add. My hat is off to you, son. But for the love of God, can we be done with this? I have actual crimes to ignore." It was the perfect out. An honorable discharge from the suburban wars, brokered by a third party. "I think we can come to an arrangement," I said. I walked over to Brenda, who was still standing frozen on her porch. "Brenda," I said, my voice gentle. "I will have my artist, Marco, tone down some of the mural's more vibrant elements. We'll make it a little more conventional." I paused for effect. "If you agree to re-aim your stadium-quality security lights so that my bedroom is no longer considered a viable landing strip for commercial aircraft." She looked from the mural to my face, then to Officer Miller, who was watching her expectantly. The fight had gone out of her. She was beaten. "Fine," she whispered. "Fine," I replied. "Okay, good," Miller said with a sigh of relief. "Shake on it." We walked to the property line and engaged in the most awkward, reluctant handshake in human history. The war was over. That evening, Brenda's brother-in-law's van returned. The floodlights were adjusted. That night, for the first time in a week, I slept in blessed, beautiful darkness. The next morning, Marco, true to my word, returned. His toning down consisted of one final, masterful touch. He painted a tiny, cool-looking pair of sunglasses on the serene, smiling sun. It was perfect. We held a celebratory barbecue in my backyard that weekend. The whole Spite Job network came. Sal, Marco, Doug, and their crews. We grilled burgers and drank beer, and they told me stories of their other legendary jobs. At the end of the night, Sal handed me a folded T-shirt. I opened it. On the front, in a simple, bold font, it read, "Malicious Compliance Division." I wore it like a badge of honor. A new fragile peace has settled over the cul-de-sac. Brenda and I don't speak, but we have an understanding. We exchange tight-lipped, vaguely respectful nods when we get our mail. The fines and notes have stopped. My house is no longer just a beige colonial with a weird wall. It's a statement. It's a testament to the fact that you don't have to be the loudest to be heard. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon is a laminated permit, a team of whisper-quiet contractors, and a deep, abiding commitment to the letter of the law. I sit on my porch sometimes, looking at my clean, mural-adorned house, and I have to smile. I bought this house to find some peace and quiet. I just never imagined I'd have to go to war to get it. And as I look at the calendar, I can't help but have one final, lingering thought. Christmas is only a few months away. I wonder what the HOA rules are on synchronized, non-auditory, high-intensity laser light displays.